Marcus stood on the ritual circle's inner ring with his right hand lifted, the hunt token balanced on his palm like a coin he might spend or crush. The token was black iron, stamped with a wolf's jaw, and the number 7 cut through the center so that candlelight could pass through it and stripe his skin. 24 witnesses formed a hard ring beyond him, shoulder to shoulder under the rafters of Iron Hall, each one with a lit taper and a strip of red cloth tied at the wrist. Wax dripped onto knuckles. Smoke braided upward and flattened under the beams. Lyra faced him from 3 paces away, chin up, throat bare above a torn collar where old hands had grabbed fabric. Rain struck the slate roof in quick teeth, then in sheets, then in a hard rattle as wind shifted. Thorne's voice cut across the hall, crisp and sharpened by habit. By statute and writ, the hunt remains lawful until dawn bell. Marcus closed his fingers over the token. The sound of metal grinding against his signet ring scraped through the silence like a file on bone. He did not turn toward the elder. He looked at Lyra and said, loud enough to strike every corner beam and every watching face, I call off the hunt. I do it because of her. I do it in my name. Every taper flame shook when the outer doors slammed in wind. Someone gasped near the west pillar. Someone else whispered a prayer and bit it back halfway. Bran, mud on both knees and one sleeve half torn from hurrying through brush, took one step forward before Nessa caught his sleeve and held him still with a kitchen-strong grip that left no room for argument. Lyra did not move. Her left hand trembled once and then went steady around the wrist cord she still wore from the first night she ran. Thorne lifted a rolled parchment like a blade. Alpha, you accepted this writ in full witness. You cannot unmake law to satisfy appetite. Marcus finally turned, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop without any change in weather. I am not unmaking law. I am correcting fraud. His next words were formal and cold, each one placed like iron stakes. High Elder Thorne, step into the ring and answer for forged evidence. A year earlier, at Winter Reckoning, frost had crawled up the inside of the hall windows in white fern patterns, and Lyra had stood on the same stone where she stood now. Back then, her braid was tighter, her mouth unbloodied, and she still believed the council would shame her, but not hunt her. She had been wrong on both counts. The reckoning table held 12 carved antler markers for the council seats, each marker polished by generations of thumbs and greasy from handling. Thorne laid his palm on the statute slate and recited hall law in a voice that prized each syllable as if legal diction itself were virtue. When a wolf rejects a claiming pact that preserves line stability and war treaty terms, the council may, by majority, order a 7-night hunt to compel return and sentence. He paused before the last word and turned his head toward Lyra, the way a butcher checks the weight of an animal before naming price. She heard the coercion terms read aloud, everyone in a clerk's dry monotone that made brutality sound administrative. Surrender chain, speaking restrictions in council contexts, breeding schedule by season, council oversight of den access, arbitration rights suspended until heirs were produced. Her back molars pressed together until pain flashed up her jaw and into her temple. She answered with no tremor. No pact signed under threat is binding. I refuse. A murmur rose from the benches, then shivered out as wardens glanced back. Thorne did not look at the benches. He looked at Marcus, then at the writ ready by his elbow. Ruling Alpha, he said, accept and execute. Marcus Blackwood stepped down from the dais and took the parchment. He broke the wax edge to read, then resealed it with his signet in plain sight. His face gave nothing to the room. No flinch, no tell, no outward resistance. I accept the writ, he said. The words landed like dropped stone in deep water. Lyra's lungs stalled halfway through a breath and forgot how to finish it. She had expected distance from him, expected political caution, expected some bleak, formal neutrality. She had not expected this clean public compliance. She had been 16 when she first watched him strip a poacher's knife and hand it back hilt first with a warning instead of a kill order. She had built a myth around that memory and called it trust. In that minute at Winter Reckoning, the myth cracked with an almost audible sound. He should have turned away after accepting. Instead, he held her in a long, charged look that made the benches go quiet for a different reason. His gaze tracked the pulse at her throat, the line of her clenched fist, the scratch on her cheek from training yard gravel, the place where fury and fear held each other by the throat. Heat climbed her neck despite the cold. She hated that her body answered him in front of witnesses. Thorne mistook the moment and smiled thinly, pleased by what he thought he saw. "Write it plain," he told the clerk. "Treason, marked to stand." Lyra's head snapped toward the table. "Treason? I refuse coercion, not the pack." "The mark stands," Thorne repeated. "Run if you choose. 7 nights." Marcus did not challenge it there. He folded the writ once, sharp and exact, and gave it back to the clerk as if returning any ordinary record. Nightfall starts the count. When the hall emptied, frost had melted in patches where bodies had stood close, leaving dark human-shaped damp on stone. Lyra waited beside the door for someone to call it error, joke, correction, anything. No one did. No one met her eyes for more than a second. She walked out with her shoulders square and her palms cut by her own nails. Nessa Reed found her near the kitchen stores 2 hours after dusk, with a lantern hooded to a slit and a loaf wrapped in linen. The kitchen wolf did not waste time on comfort phrases or false softness. She shoved the bundle into Lyra's hands and said, "Eat while you can chew." I copied the writ. Lyra unwrapped the loaf enough to see steam escape and crust crackle, then saw folded paper tucked under the crust. "You stole from council records?" "I borrowed eyesight." Nessa leaned against a barrel of salted eel and pulled a charcoal nub from her pocket. On the back of the copy, she had sketched the seal position and 2 script lines beneath it. "Look at where treason mark sits, added after sealing, ink fresher, hand tilt wrong, spacing wrong. Whoever did it got greedy and wrote too close to the margin." Lyra's thumb shook over the page edge, then stilled as she forced her hand flat. "If this is true, it's enough to challenge. It's enough to die for if we say it wrong." Nessa's mouth flattened. She glanced toward the stairwell, listening for boots. "You can't bring this alone." A rat darted under the barrel rack. Somewhere above, cooks banged lids and cursed about missing tallow while stew hissed over a low fire. Life went on over their heads like nothing had cracked. Lyra tore bread and swallowed without tasting. He accepted the writ. He accepted in public. That's not the same as belief. Nessa tapped the sketched seal with a blackened finger. "You know what he trained in before he took the chair." "Treaty warden apprenticeship," Lyra said. "Exactly. Wax, seals, signatures, chain of custody, archive protocol. He can smell bad resin like old onions. Use that." Nessa touched Lyra's forearm, a brief, firm squeeze, calloused thumb warm through damp sleeve. "Run smart. Night 1 starts now." Lyra wrapped the copy around her middle under her shirt, tied with twine, then tucked waxed cloth over it so rain would not melt ink. Her body wanted to fold in on itself, shame like a fist under her ribs, but she forced her spine straight, tucked hair under a dark scarf, and took the back stairs to the storage yard. Snowmelt turned ash to black paste under her boots. She moved along the coop wall, waited while 2 wardens argued over dice near the gatehouse, and slipped through when one went to piss in the alley. At the gate, she looked once toward the Alpha Tower window, saw no light, and slipped into the pines. Night 1 burned calves and lungs. Night 2 scraped skin from her palms when she went down on shale and caught herself late. Night 2 also taught her which ravens watched riders and called with different notes when they smelled blood. By night 3, rain had changed to a fine, cold needle that made every scent sharp and every breath sting. She reached the old salt gate just before moonrise, chest tight from climbing, and found Marcus waiting under the broken arch where miners once weighed carts and paid tax in sacks of crystal. He did not step forward at once. Water ran from his hair to his jaw and dropped from his chin in steady beats. "You picked a predictable route," he said. Lyra laughed once, rough and spent. "Predictable to the man who drew map corrections for this valley." The hunt band on her wrist had turned the skin beneath it raw and angry red. Marcus's gaze dropped there, then rose. He held his hands open where she could see them. "I came without escort." "Alone means less blood if you're lying." He breathed in through his nose, as if scent could answer insult better than speech. "You think I want your blood?" "Council wants my compliance. Sometimes blood comes packaged with it." She shifted weight to her back foot, ready to bolt toward the ravine line. The mud there was bad, but she knew where stone ribs surfaced. "Say why you're here." He crossed the last pace slowly, boots grinding wet grit. She smelled wet iron from his belt buckle, pine pitch from his cloak stitching, and the clean bite of rain on wool. His hand lifted toward the chain at her throat, the thin steel loop she'd worn since her mother died, then stopped a finger's width short, suspended in rain. "I want you," he said, voice low and stripped of title, without decree, without leash. The words struck deeper than threat. Her pulse jumped in both wrists so hard she felt each beat against the soaked cuff. Heat spread under her sternum, impossible in the cold, quick and humiliating and fiercely alive. She hated the response and could not deny it. "You had the haul. You had your voice. You used neither." "If I challenged then," Thorne would pivot to Alpha Protect's favorite and force immediate claim hearing under his terms. Marcus lowered his hand, fingers curling once before he stilled them. "I would not let him weaponize me against you." Convenient after the fact? True before, during, and after. He touched the stone beside her shoulder instead of her skin, knuckles white against wet granite, giving her a fixed point that was not contact. "I rejected your petition last winter for the same reason." Her head jerked. "My petition to transfer border duty?" "Yes." Thorne attached a hidden addendum. Acceptance counted as implied claim concession to council authority. Rain ran down his lashes. He did not blink it away. "I blocked it and took your anger." She remembered that day. Her request returned unsigned, his two-line denial, her rage so clean it had felt righteous. She had cursed him for a week, and then for months in quieter ways. "You could have told me?" "In writing? Through clerks he controlled?" His mouth tightened. "I told no one what I could not prove." Rain hammered the arch until speech had to be louder. Lyra stared at him, searching for a crack in expression, a tell in his jaw, any twitch of satisfaction. She found strain and something like hunger held on a short chain. "Proof," she said. "No more words without proof." He nodded once. "You'll have it. By dawn of night 7, if not sooner." "Night 7 is too late." "Then by night 5." He stepped back, granting distance she had demanded and making no attempt to follow when she angled away. "Where can I send safe signal?" Lyra pointed toward the abandoned kiln above the creek. "1 lantern in the north slit means come alone. 2 means danger. None means move on." Marcus gave a short, grim smile. "You always did choose practical codes." She kept her face hard. "Don't call me by memory like we're past this." He bowed his head once, formal now. Alpha discipline back in place like armor. "Survive tonight." Lyra turned first. At the edge of the arch, she forced herself not to look back, and failed after 6 steps. He was still there, unmoving in rain, one hand on the same stone where her shoulder had been. She hated that she noticed. No one slept much in those nights. Thorn sent riders who knew the lower trails and one tracker bitch who could hold scent through sleet. Lyra moved through thorn breaks and drainage cuts, crossed stream beds on fallen trunks, ate cold potato and hard cheese from Nessa's second bundle, and kept the writ copy dry inside waxed cloth tucked against skin. She learned to scrape mud off boots with a flat shard so prints looked older than they were. She tied pine bough behind her pack and brushed out shallow tracks where ground softened. By night 4, she had a split lip, 2 blisters burst open, and a bruise blooming purple along her ribs where she'd clipped a stump in the dark. The kiln lantern stayed dark until the deepest hour before dawn, and every minute before it lit felt like an extra weight tied to her lungs. Nessa arrived with Bran at first light on night 5, both streaked in soot from taking the chimney path. Bran Vale had grown since Lyra last saw him. Shoulders broader, voice still rough at the edges of adulthood. He gripped a ledger fragment wrapped in oiled rag like it might burn him. He saw it happen, Nessa said without preamble. Her breath fogged hard in the kiln loft. Tell her. Bran swallowed and wiped his nose on his sleeve. I was on ash duty in the record room. Thorn's clerk sent me for sand. I came back early because the sand bucket cracked. He spoke too fast, then forced himself slower because Lyra held up a hand. I saw the clerk reopen your writ ledger and add 2 lines under the sealed entry, treason mark and hunt compulsion authorized. I saw him blow on the ink. I smelled it, fresh, like metal and gum. Lyra held out her hand. Bran gave her the fragment. The script on it matched the copied edition, same hooked tail on the letter R, same cramped spacing, same pressure digs at line ends. Why keep this? She asked. I scraped it from blotter scrap bin. Thought it looked wrong? He lifted his chin, trying to be older than fear. They called me liar when I mentioned it. Thorn told wardens I was unstable. They revoked my patrol pass. Nessa snorted softly. They revoked it because he was too honest in the wrong room. Rage moved through Lyra clean and bright. You should have stayed hidden. Bran's mouth twisted. And leave you hunted? Before she could answer, boots sounded below on the outer stair and then stopped in the agreed pattern. 2 taps. Pause. 1. Marcus came at noon. Alone as promised, cloak dark with travel mud and one sleeve torn on briar. He took the copy, the fragment, and a small plug of wax Nessa had pried from the writ shelf edge. From his satchel he drew a narrow brass lens and a knife with etched measurement marks along the spine. Nessa whistled softly. You carry half a warden kit. Old habits. Marcus knelt on flat stone and set the wax samples side by side, careful to keep hands visible and motions deliberate so no one could later claim substitution. Hall records use alder smoke resin in winter. Thorn's private office uses juniper gum. He shaved a sliver from each with the knife, warmed them over a tinder spark, and held them near their noses one at a time. Alder is bitter and smoky. Juniper is sweet and sharp. Lyra inhaled. One sample smelled like burnt rope and old smokehouse beams. The other had resin sweetness like snapped branches over flame. Different, she said. Different enough for witnesses. Marcus turned the lens to inspect impression depth. Also look. Council Seal Ridge should be full circle. This one has a tiny flattening at north edge from a chipped stamp kept in Thorn's desk. I documented that chip 3 winters ago during treaty archive rotation. It appears on his private correspondence, never on council issue seal. It appears here. Bran crouched close, eyes huge despite himself. Will they listen? Marcus met him squarely. With witnesses and physical demonstration in the circle, they must. Must isn't always does, Nessa muttered. No, Marcus agreed, without flinching from the truth of it. So we stack proof until refusal costs them their own skin. They moved fast after that because speed itself became protection. Marcus sent formal summons for evidentiary hearing on night 6, forcing quorum rules and record attendance. Thorne tried to delay by claiming moon illness and citing procedural fatigue. Marcus invoked emergency statute under active hunt conditions. Thorne's allies argued sequence. Marcus cited precedents by year in line and made the clerk read them aloud until even the allies looked tired of pretending confusion. By sunset, 4 wardens escorted sealed boxes to Iron Hall. Lyra did not return with them. She stayed in the kiln loft until called, fingers worrying the edge of her wrist cord until fibers frayed into soft fuzz. The hearing stretched to dawn and collapsed under procedural filibuster, exactly as Thorne intended. He demanded fresh attestations for every sample, then attacked Bran's age, then questioned Nessa's access rights to kitchen-adjacent record corridors, then challenged lamplight reliability for visual ink judgments. Marcus countered each point with statute numbers and precedent dates. Lyra listened from behind a lattice panel where servants once watched feasts. Every time she heard Thorne say, "the girl," her nails dug crescents into her palms. Every time she heard Marcus answer with her full name, a steadier rhythm returned to her breathing. At dawn, bell of night 7, the hunt should have ended in capture or death. Instead, Marcus requested adjournment and, in front of all 12 council seats, announced a delayed final reckoning for 1 year hence under seasonal witness requirements and full ritual circle review. Thorne smiled as if he had won, because delay looked like defeat to anyone watching only surface. Lyra came down the back stairs to confront Marcus in the hall corridor where shield plaques hung dusty and crooked, old victories dim under grime. "A year?" she hissed. "You said night 5, night 7, not a year." He braced one hand on the wall beside a cracked boar crest. Weariness showed then, deep and unguarded. "I got enough to block sentence, not enough to strip him clean. He has vote allies for now. In 1 year, witness composition changes at reckoning. We bring this before full circle with legal noose tight." She wanted to hit him and kiss him, and do neither under painted dead eyes. "If I vanish before then? You won't." He handed her a folded packet sealed with plain string, no crest, no scent marker. "Protected travel rights under my authority. New patrol assignment outside Thorne's reach. Officially punishment post, actually shield." She took the packet without opening it. "And Bran?" "Restoration petition drafted. Stalled until reckoning, but he stays under my den guard list and meal rights. No one removes him quietly." Lyra exhaled through clenched teeth. "You keep making moves that look like harm." "I know." His voice roughened. "I'm asking you to hold through 1 winter, 1 spring, 1 summer, 1 autumn. Then we end this where it began." She tucked the packet into her coat. "If you fail, I won't run next time. I'll burn the hall with him in it." Marcus's mouth twitched. Not amusement exactly, more recognition of the honest threat. "Then I'd better not fail." 1 year moved by in work and controlled fury. Lyra rode outer boundaries with 2 saddlebags and no banner, checked traps, mapped storm-fallen trees, and slept in watch huts that smelled of old smoke and damp straw. She learned which ridgelines held wind from the north and which pooled fog by dawn. She learned the exact number of heartbeats it took to calm after hearing hoofbeats behind her at dusk. 30 if familiar, 60 if unknown, 100 if the horse carried council tack. Each month she received a coded strip from Nessa hidden in flour sacks dropped at relay points. 3 knots meant safe, 1 knot meant caution. A red thread through the fold meant Thorne stirring trouble in back rooms. Nessa's notes were practical as ever. New clerk in East Records. Avoid him. Bran still watched. Says he can handle it. Thorne asks too often about your route. Changed delivery path. Sometimes there was a scrap of kitchen gossip tucked in because survival also needed ordinary texture. Marta burned stew. Blamed spirits. Roof over pantry leaks again. You still owe me 1 sack of decent coffee. Spring thaw brought Bran to her post twice under escort. He grew less jumpy, started carrying himself like someone who believed his own testimony mattered. He still flinched when doors slammed, but he didn't apologize for speaking. They practiced statements out loud beside a creek, while meltwater pushed ice shards downstream in grinding clinks. Lyra made him repeat only what he saw, not what he assumed, until his account came clear and hard as hammered nails. "What did you see?" she asked. The clerk reopened the ledger. "What exactly did you hear?" "Nothing but page turn and pen scratch." "What did you smell?" "Fresh ink and juniper wax." "What didn't you see?" "Who ordered him?" "I didn't see Thorn in room." "Good," she said. "Truth without decoration. They can't break what you don't overstate." Summer heat drew resin from the pines and made everything sticky. Marcus met her twice at legal checkpoints in plain view of wardens, never touching, speaking only logistics with the dry cadence of officials discussing supply counts. "Witness list finalized," he said once while pretending to inspect saddle straps. 24 in the ritual circle. We have 6 neutrals." "Neutrals are weather vanes," Lyra replied, tightening a girth knot that did not need tightening. "Then we stand where wind hits first." Another time he handed her a map roll with innocuous markings. Tucked inside was a single line in his hand: "Still with you." She burned it after reading because caution had become muscle memory, but she held the warmth of the paper in her palm for a long minute before feeding it to flame. Autumn cut leaves to rust and brass. Rain came in long diagonal sheets that turned trails to slurry. On the eve of the next winter reckoning, Nessa arrived at Lyra's post with a bundle of clean clothes, a comb, and a bowl wrapped in wool. The bowl was carved oak with a bronze rim, old enough that the inner grain had gone smooth from generations of thumbs and ceremonies survived. "For after," she said, dropping the bundle on Lyra's bunk as if it weighed nothing. Lyra touched the rim through wool. "You're assuming there is an after." Nessa snorted. "I'm preparing one, assuming gets people killed. Preparing keeps them fed." "You always bring food into strategy." "I'm a kitchen wolf. Strategy is food plus knives." She looked Lyra over, took in healing scars and the tension that never fully left her shoulders. "You ready?" "No," Lyra said honestly. Then, after a beat, "Yes." By the time they reached Iron Hall the next day, snow had begun in dry powder that squeaked under boots and dusted shoulders white. The hall smelled of tallow, wet wool, old stone, and iron filings from fresh sharpened spears. 24 witnesses took their marked places in the ritual circle, exactly as statute required for reversal hearings tied to hunt law. Red cloth strips at wrists, tapers in hand, names recorded by 2 clerks to prevent later disputes about attendance. Marcus entered in dark formal coat with no fur trim, alpha chain visible, sword peace-tied. Lyra wore gray with the old throat chain and no painted mark on her skin. Bran stood at the 3rd witness post, hands folded behind his back to stop their shake. Nessa remained near the west pillar, bowl still wrapped, expression unreadable unless you knew her well enough to see the alertness around her eyes. Thorn began with practiced indignation and a perfect legal posture. "This proceeding insults council continuity and undermines confidence in governance." Marcus cut across him. "Continuity without integrity is rot. Begin evidence." He called Bran first. The boy, man now, stepped forward with careful feet and spoke into the circle with his voice cracking only once on the word sealed. "I saw the clerk add 2 lines after seal. I saw fresh ink shine. I kept blotter scrap." He held up the fragment with clean fingers and steady wrists. "This is that scrap." Thorn pounced. "A child's imagination, trained by grievance." Bran did not flinch. "I was old enough to carry your coal scuttle and scrape your boots. Old enough to notice when law changed after signing." A rustle moved through witnesses. Two exchanged looks that were not neutral anymore. Marcus called for wax demonstration next. He laid 2 pellets on a heated spoon over candle flame, then invited 3 neutral witnesses to smell both in turn, so no partisan could claim selective sampling. Each gave answer in a clipped voice recorded by clerks. Alder bitter. Juniper sweet. Not the same source. He pressed the chipped seal impression into soft wax and held it beside the writ cast so everyone could see the flattened north ridge match. He passed both to the nearest neutral, then the next again, forcing tactile confirmation through the ring. Thorne demanded his clerk be called immediately, leaning on procedural theatrics. Marcus answered with a paper already in hand. Clerk confessed at dawn under oath in presence of 2 wardens, Marcus said. Statement sealed and countersigned. Lyra felt the old humiliation rise like bile when she heard sealed, but this time the word did not trap her. It landed as leverage. She locked her knees and held steady. Thorne shifted tactics, turning to the crowd with hands spread in false reason. Even if alteration occurred, the girl rejected lawful pact. Hunt still justified. Marcus stepped to the center stone and lifted the black token. The cutout 7 flashed in candlelight. No. He faced the witnesses, not the council bench. The pact terms included coercion conditions she heard read aloud. Speech limits, breeding schedule, confinement access. Under Section 4, coercive terms void consent. Hunt order built on coercion and forged treason addendum. Therefore, null. He turned then, finally, to Lyra. The hall quieted until candle fat hissed audibly in one saucer and someone's breath rattled in their throat. I accepted the writ in public because I needed the paper in my hand to break the trap lawfully. I would do that calculation again. He held her gaze without flinching. But hear me in full witness now. I call off the hunt because Lyra is not prey, not leverage, not council property. She is the reason. No one could pretend misunderstanding. The statement struck with all the force of title and all the risk of personal truth declared in a room built to punish it. Thorne's face mottled red up to the temples. Alpha confesses personal bias, Marcus answered without raising volume. Alpha confesses choice. He requested vote on sanctions for evidence tampering by an elder. 12 antler markers were lifted in sequence while clerks counted aloud. 10 for removal, 1 abstain, 1 against. Statute required 8. Marcus spoke the verdict with no flourish. Thorne is stripped of vote and removed from sitting authority effective now. The elder straightened his robe as if cloth could restore status. He looked at Lyra with naked hate and the last scraps of performed authority. You think elevation makes you safe. Before Lyra could answer, Nessa stepped forward from the pillar and met the old man eye to eye. Warning heard, she said, voice flat as cleaver steel. We heard it from your own mouth in front of 24 witnesses. Try repeating it in writing. I'd love cleaner evidence. A few witnesses coughed to hide startled laughter. Wardens escorted Thorne out through the east door. His heel snagged once on the threshold. He did not look back. Next came restoration petitions. Marcus called Bran to the center and read, Pack protection reinstated with full patrol eligibility and den access restored. He handed over a leather pass tag stamped fresh and warm from the seal press. Bran took it in both hands, blinked hard, and looked to Lyra as if asking permission to smile. She nodded once. His grin cracked wide and sudden, younger than his new broad shoulders. The formal ring dissolved slowly as witnesses extinguished candles, pinched wicks between damp fingers, and tied cloth strips to a central cord as record of attendance. Snowlight through high windows went from pale blue to white. People spoke in low bursts, the way crowds do after witnessing a fall they did not expect, and a reversal they would retell for years with different emphases depending on loyalty. Lyra remained where she was until Marcus approached with no one between them. For a beat, he said nothing. He looked as though the last year had carved new lines at the corners of his mouth and eyes. Then he offered his hand, palm up, callus at the base of thumb visible from sword work and years of rains. She placed her hand in his. Contact ran through her like struck wire. Heat, relief, anger not gone but transformed into something she could hold without bleeding from it. He tightened fingers once, not claiming, simply present. "You named me reason in front of all of them," she said. "I should have named you sooner." "Maybe, but if you had, we might be dead." Her mouth tilted despite herself. "I hate that both are true." He gave a short breath that could have been a laugh if the day had been softer. "Come with me." They left the center hall by the side passage to the old armory gallery, now mostly storage for winter blankets and cracked shields. Their boots echoed on stone worn shallow in the middle from generations passing through in urgency or secrecy. Snow tapped the narrow windows. A brass lamp on the shelf threw honey light over dust motes, old spearheads, and the ridge of his cheek. Marcus reached to touch her face and stopped midway, hand suspended in old caution. "May I?" Lyra answered by taking his wrist and guiding his hand to her jaw. His thumb traced the old scar near her ear, then the curve below it where pulse beat fast. She stepped in, chest to chest, and felt his heartbeat heavy and even under wool. He bent and kissed her once, careful, tasting of cold air and smoke, then again, with more urgency. The world narrowed to breath, mouth, the scrape of stubble against her skin, the press of his fingers spread over her back. The sound she made when she stopped pretending composure mattered more than wanting. When she tugged at his coat clasp, he caught her hand gently, not restraining so much as asking for pause, with touch alone. "Wait." Her eyes narrowed, breath uneven. "Are you pulling away?" "No." He rested his forehead to hers. "I am saying the next step is not a heat of victory accident. Once we bind, I will not unmake it, and neither will you." She stared at him for a long count of 5, then 7. "Good. I won't bind without terms." "Set them." She began at once, practical and fierce, voice still rough from kissing but mind clear as knife edge. No confinement by rank, no breeding directives from council or proxies, shared command on border deployments with written rotation. "My den remains mine even when we share it." Bran under joint protection clauses until he chooses his own house and says it aloud before witnesses. Any public censure to be answered together, in the same room, same hour. Marcus listened without interruption, nodding at each point, repeating 2 of them back to confirm wording. "Accepted. Add 1 from me. No disappearing for months with only knot codes unless life requires it." Lyra huffed a breath that might have been the beginning of a laugh. "Accepted with exception for covert operations agreed in advance." "Done." Footsteps sounded in corridor outside, brisk and familiar. Nessa entered carrying the wrapped oak bowl. She looked from one face to the other, took in flushed mouths and unfastened coat clasp, and did not comment because she had more useful talents than teasing. She set the bowl on a crate between them and unwrapped the wool. Bronze rim caught lamplight. The bowl held water, a pinch of salt, and a sprig of winter rosemary floating near the edge. Nessa produced a small knife and laid it beside the bowl with deliberate care. "You wanted negotiated terms," she said. "Seal them the old way. Not council chain. Chosen oath." Bran appeared behind her, hovering at threshold with his restored pass tag hanging from a leather thong. He had clearly run to fetch extra candles and forgotten to light them. Nessa jerked her chin toward him. "He stays for witness?" Lyra looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Lyra. Both answered together. "Yes." They stood on either side of the crate. Marcus spoke first, formal cadence stripped to essentials and free of council ornament. "I, Marcus, choose bond without compulsion and yield unilateral claim rights." Lyra followed without hesitation. "I, Lyra, choose bond without coercion, and retain autonomous command rights, as agreed. She took the knife, nicked her thumb, and let one drop fall into the salted water. He did the same. Red swirled, thinned, disappeared into clear. They clasped forearms over the bowl, skin to skin, and held while their breaths synced on instinct. Nessa cleared her throat, ceremony practical as everything else she did. State witness names. Witness Nessa, Lyra said. Witness Bran, Marcus said. Bran swallowed, then found his voice, steadier than he expected. Witnessed. Outside, bells marked second watch. Snow against window shifted from tap to hush as wind changed direction and settled. They could have gone farther then, closed a door, taken each other with the urgency still humming under skin. Instead, Lyra untangled first and placed the knife back on the wool. Marcus did not protest. He brushed a wet strand of hair from her temple and kissed the center of her forehead, a gesture so unexpectedly tender it nearly broke her composure more than any hunger had. "Tonight we sleep," she said, surprising herself with certainty. "Tomorrow, we decide where to live, how to announce terms, who gets kitchen duty, and how to keep this from turning into another weapon in council mouths." At that, Nessa finally snorted a laugh. "Kitchen duty is always whoever burns oats. That is ancient law, and I enforce it with ladles." "Then he's doomed," Lyra said, jerking her chin at Marcus. "I can cook 3 things," he replied. "Meat, tea, and apologies." "Keep practicing the third," she said, but she was smiling when she said it. No chain would ever feel like trust, not to her. Not after being named prey by men who called that governance. Trust would have to be built from repeated choices in ordinary rooms, shared reports, argued decisions, hands offered and refused and offered again, warnings taken seriously, anger spoken before it curdled, names used correctly in public, doors left unlocked by consent rather than neglect. The armory gallery grew warmer as Bran lit the extra candles one by one, each flare pushing shadows back from old shields. Wax scent layered over iron dust and rosemary. Nessa leaned her hip against the shelf and watched them with the guarded satisfaction of someone who had carried too many secrets through too many kitchens to waste delight on theatrics. Marcus and Lyra stood close, not fused, not distant, a measured space between their boots that each could cross without losing footing. He offered his hand again. She took it. Through the narrow window, dawn began as a thin silver seam over the eastern ridge. The seam widened, touching the bowl's bronze lip until it flashed bright. Lyra lifted the bowl, drank first, and passed it to Marcus. Salt and rosemary hit her tongue, clean and sharp. He drank, then passed it to Bran, then Nessa, each taking a small swallow, each returning it carefully to her hands. When the last bell of night fell silent, no one reached for paper. No one needed to. Lyra set the bowl on the sill, palm resting on worn oak, and felt Marcus's thumb stroke once across her knuckles as the first full light entered the room. Behind them, Nessa gathered the wool wrap and the knife, practical as dawn. Bran stood straighter with his pass tag catching morning light, no longer hovering like someone waiting to be dismissed. In the hall below, voices rose as day shift took posts and rumor outran breakfast. Up here, for one held breath of time, there was only the scrape of wick, the smell of rosemary, and the fact of 4 witnesses to a fall, a warning, and a rise. Lyra looked at Marcus and did not look away. "Same room," she said quietly, echoing her own term. "Same room, always, for what matters." "Same room," he answered. Nessa, already at the door, glanced back once and nodded as if checking that a hearth fire had caught properly before leaving it to burn. Bran followed her, then paused long enough to meet Lyra's eyes and tap the edge of his new pass in a small salute that held gratitude and promise both. When they were alone, Marcus did not close distance immediately. He gave her the respect of one heartbeat, two, three, enough for choice to remain visible. Lyra crossed the space first. Outside, snow kept falling over Iron Hall, softening tracks at the threshold and whitening the stones where a year ago she had walked out hunted. Inside, with dawn widening and the council's old trap broken in full witness, she stood where she had been diminished and felt, at last, the weight shift.